Hello everyone, I'm Acha Rahmati. I'm from Class A, English Department 2021. So in this video, I'm going to analyze the poem Love Philosophy by Percy Shelley. So guys, now everything I go through in this video interesting poem is considering the complexity of some of the poems we have studied in the series Love Philosophy proves to be a comparatively simple poem to analyze, and it might be a natural choice for those of you who perhaps find the poetry really difficult. This is the kind of poem you might like to try and compare in many ways. It's a continuation of the common poetic topic where a male speaker tries to persuade his female listener to engage in a physical relationship with him. So, I will talk about this video before we get any further through. Let's have a look at the poet Percy Shelley. Now, Percy Shelley is the most interesting people who has ever lived, although we should only study areas of the poet's life which are important to our understanding of their poetry with Shelley. It is just too interesting not a look at everything. He was born in 1792. He was one of the romantic poets which I'll talk about in a second. He came from a very wealthy family and was set in hard riches, and the role of MP he went to Eton and Oxford. So there was a stage in his life where everything was laid out in front of him, and it looked like he was going to have a very rich and successful life. But he was expelled from university for writing. I am in a favor of ITES. He actually wrote to all of this sort of document argues against the existence of God, and was tired out and his father disowned him and the help and ran off for the 16-year-old who he married, and then he later left his wife and ran off with Mary Shelley, who went and write Frankenstein. A couple 2 weeks after that, after leaving his wife, commits suicide. And just a couple of weeks later, he married Mary Shelley, who of course was only called Mary Shelley when she married Percy Shelley, and he drowned at sea while sailing to Arn in Italy and around Italy. He drowned at sea, the age Italy and around Italy at age of 29. So as you can see, a vacation and life. Now, which of these detail helps us with understanding the coin? Well, number 2, the fact that he was one of the romantic poets, but also number 6, the fact that he was a very staunch atheist. Now it's interesting to note that Shelley wasn't very successful as a writer during his own lifetime. He was associated with the much more successful poets Bernard Keats, but Shelley worked almost exclusively for himself with a major interest from the public. But today we regard him as one of the most famous poets ever, perhaps strongly because of dealing with his wife, who wrote Frankenstein and the kind of whole thing going together their Shelley. So, was a deeply political person. He was a specific would believe in non-violent protest. He was a vegetarian. He wrote widely on the subject of vegetarianism, and an atheist as well. Now he is one of romantic poets and romantic poetry. We can simply it to those 3 sort of mind generic conversation. It's a more complex than that, but at GCSE it's helpful to have a kind of useful so simple approach. So number one is a dislike or urban life and an embrace of the natural world. Number two, of love of the supernatural. And number three, a use of everyday ordinary language. Now, the most famous early romantics were Wondersford and College, but by the time the Shelley was writing, it was felt that the early romantic had sold out. For example, Wordsworth was there working as a taxman, so the second generation of romantic went to set themselves apart from the old court. On the given this definition on the screen, we can definitely say the love philosophy clearly fits the conversation of romantic poetry is a way that perhaps April when he with two part doesn't clearly fit the conversation. Interesting line of comparison to be doesn't clearly had their love philosophy focus entirely on the natural world in contains some supernatural imagery, and she made up for mostly simple language, so it's a very much fit this definition. Now let's begin with the poem itself. I'll give you a sort of line by line translation. It's not too tricky to understand, just a couple of moments. So, where you might wonder what's happening, so let me help you out with these two verses. The first verse says, and the fountains mingle with the river, and the river with the ocean. The winds of heaven mix forever with a sweet emotion. Nothing in the world is single, all things by a law divine. In one another's being mingle, why not I with time? So, what is this saying? Hers is basically saying that the springs, that's what fountains means. In this case, the spring become one with the river. The rivers flow into the ocean. The wind sobs of mix together forever with a sweet emotion. Nothing on the world, nothing in the world is on there's a good given a law which makes things unit together. So why don't you and I do the same? We see that he is speaking to somebody, her in first to see. I do the same. We see that he's speaking to somebody. The mountains kiss high heaven, and the waves clubs one another. No sister flower would be forgiven if I did die its brother. And the sunlight clothes the earth, and the moonbeams kiss the sea. What are all these kiss words in kiss not me? So what is he saying? Here will the mountains reach up to the sky and kiss it. The waves fasten tightly into each other. No flower would be forgiven if it considered other flowers and worth it is company, and the sunlight hits the earth. The moonlight kisses the sea. What are all these amazing moments of natural unity worth if you don't kiss me? So, as you can see, love's philosophy fairly simple. Its structure as a two-part argument where both stanza essentially repeat the same point. Stanza what is a saying that in nature things are unit and together, and you know that the fountains unit the river, at which in turn unit with the seas. And the point of all this is the final line of the standard, which asks why. Asks why want you unit with me, and first you is not the same. The waves clubs together, some like clubs the earth, so why won't you kiss me? Now, incidentally, this is a very popular poem that is read at weddings, and there is essentially a valid interpretation. But looking at the love philosophy, a sort of sweet romantic verse, but there's plenty of evidence so to suggest the speaker in the poem is actually demanding and perhaps courteously persuading his lover to be physical with him. Now, of course, all the he actually asks for is, let's mingle and let's kiss, but we get the idea that perhaps this a man who wants to have sex with the woman. Oh, he loves her, and he's trying to persuade her, to go to and to do that with him. And whenever we'll have different ideas about the pot, what we need to do is we need to think about language and the structure and form, and we need to we need to think about language and the structure and form backs up our ideas. So we're going to go though from the structure language and just going to sort of give you some ideas about how to analyze the form, and you put a comment in the comment section. Okay, so let me know what you think. Actually, before we go any further, let me just say it again, like when we took part the storyline of the poem, what you actually I think is going on a sort of plot level isn't actually as important as an analysis of the language structure and the form. So whether you think it is a sort of domineering male trying who pursues his girlfriend into having sex with him or somebody, right? Love his girlfriend, just want to a kiss with her, and it's sort of being very romantic. It almost doesn't matter is the analyze the matter, and we'll get into that now. So guys, now there's some debate over the form of this poem. Explanation of both over the poem as the whether it is a lyric poem of dramatic monologue. I'll give you an explanation of both. So the thing about lyric poems, as we saw again with when the two parts, is that they emotional poem, where the poem isn't really telling a story. He is just expressing his thought and the feelings, and we could say that his poem very much fits into the idea of life lyric. Poetry, there's no real story. There is no kind of progression. There is just one main idea, with is nature is unity. So why can we be and but main idea, which is now there's some debate over the form of this poem, get whether it is a lyric poem or a dramatic monologue. I'll give you an explanation of both. So the thing about lyric poems, as we saw again with two parts, is that they are emotional poems where the poet isn't really telling a story. He's just expressing his thought and the feelings, and we could say this point very much fits into the idea of life lyric poetry. There's not really story, there is no kind of progression. There just one main idea, which is nature is unity. So why can we be and but there's a couple of interesting points to do with now let me just say that this poem was written around the same time, and Shelley was writing other lyric poems in volume 4 of the poems album. So with the poem is a lyric, the first in the with what he was writing, and at the time now, even if it is a lyric poem, that it doesn't necessarily have to be the poets writing about their own experience, but the obvious is a poem about Shelley writing about his own feelings. Then there's some ambiguous because of this use religious imagery within the poem. So as have already stated, Shelley was very anti-religion, passionately so, and that doesn't quite tie in the with this idea of this pursuit relief of religious imagery in what is a very short and simple form. We see three examples of religious imagery with heaven defined and forgiven. Now on the surface we can interpret it. This is to mean that the speaker feels his love is correct, his love is perfect and holy, but knowing that Shelley was deeply against religion is more likely than he's actually using religious imagery in the almost rhetorical tongue within the checked way, almost like he's using every line of a human he can think of to persuade his lover to sleep with him, and the use religious imagery present the speaker perhaps as this suggests as a man who's going to say whatever it takes to win his women of other dissect clues. We can assume the poem is written from the Shelley as a viewpoint, even if it's a lyric. But another idea is, well, could this poem is a dramatic monologue? You can see if the poem is not written from the perspective of Shelley himself. It certainly fits in this form of dramatic monologue, which means that his poems contains a single person who the role of stalking somebody else, but we never hear from the person who's been spoken to be the speaker. In the dramatic, the monologue is never the poet is just talking this character, and the character speak to a silent listener. And with dramatic monologue from the means that we're listening it to a one-way conversation, and it is the form which allows to use identify about the speaker, analyze character from the words they usually the reader works in a sort of detective to analyze clues which reveal key details about the speaker in this case. But the first male reveal there's a gap between what the speaker wants to use. Now what the reader like the lines. Now there is not really any sort of defined type to answer the hard. I think it's quite clear to say that the poem follows many of the preferences of the dramatic monologue, that in somebody speaking to somebody who is silent listener, but we may not go as far to say it's definitely the of dramatic monologue, and it also fits in right in with the lyric poem as well. So you can sort of think about the source of. I'm just trying to present numbers interpretation, because what we have to be careful of with poetry is to say this mean this, we just have to sort explode various idea. Most critics would be called it a lyric, but it does follow the form of the dramatic monologue. It's much as the speaker is talking good directly the song to who is a silent listener, and even when the speaker asks direct questions such as was I not I with time, we never hear the answer given, and this form present the man of demanding and the domineering who doesn't seem to care for the women's response. You can, whenever you have dance poems where it's about a man and woman, but we only ever hear one side of the kind of conversation, you can analyze and say here I'll have the same from poem where it's about a man and women, but we only ever hear here, and what side of the kind conversation you can analyze then and say, well, the man is the sort of controlling domineering one. We don't even hear here is never written down how the women respond, because it almost seems like this important. This is about the man getting what they want rather than a short conversation talking the place and the views what field. And that's what I think is interesting with love's philosophy, is not actually felt that you are going to completely persuade a woman to have sex with this humans. There are almost humorous kind of things with check in the banter almost going on. So in this topic, so the idea of men to run this white women to have a sex with him, oh, it's a very old historic idea, and the idea exploring in the poetry is also something that we have seen historical as well. You are studying the GCSE for AQ A, you wouldn't written about the flair this of his toy mistress. I think is wouldn't write about the flair of the mistress. In something to this about how this poem is one many poems where a man is trying to get something physical with his sex or just kiss. Oh my god. But there seems to be more than that of a woman doesn't seems to be able to do sort of except his goals and use of kind of business line of human to you try and achieve it anyway. Something for you think about now. Let's have a look at the structure of the poem. The poem is a structure of formal achievement. Now it's about verses, but I'm just looking at the here in the first verse. There are 5 clear assertions that are made in each first 5 clear statements, which is present of effect. The fountain mixed with the rivers with the ocean, and the winds together. Nothing is single. It's defined lawsuit of this kind of list of sort of factual statement. And then after that we have the question. The question now sort of factual statement, and then after that we have any question and an historical question. Now the rhetorical question in this case is why not I with time? In other words, why aren't you and I mingling? But it's why not I with time? In other words, why aren't you and mingling? But by stating the 5 assertion as fact and starting with those, the speaker sounds authoritative and accurate, then by ending with the question why not I with time. The weight of the argument is stronger because everything that's been said already before it seems to be true, and this is in our persuasive technique. You can use facts to ever authoritative and accurate, and then use something in your main point. The fifth for your main point feels like it's short or accurate. Now the most interesting structure point is both verses follow this almost identical structure. 5 expressions about nature followed by a rhetorical question, and this respirative structure I think is highlights the preparative demands of the speaker. It is almost like the first verse of persuasive was clearly not speaker. It's almost like the first verse in of persuasive was clearly not the successful to, so he repeats the argument in the second verse, and this structural repetition represents the speaker is demanding he will not take no for an answer. You can almost feel the gaps that he said no after the rhetorical question in the first one, and then so he came in the white a second line of FU, and against that's something we see in this type of sort in the meaning love poetry, and this is backed up by the way in the white. In the full poem is a file to its repetition. There are 10 references to the kind of the we see in the nature and the white. It was really interesting that the speaker of the has one line of argument which is of the natural what everything is unit, so will be unit to be argument is a very complex, and this again I think ties to in which John dance the flea where it is complex, and this again very possible the speaker knows he's not going to be persuasive with this. Very possible the speaker knows the going to persuasive with this line of argument, but it's simply having to exploring if he really wanted to win her over. With this word he didn't solely think on numerous lines of argument for her to sort of mingle with him. The user language of the poems, there's also sense the speaker of becoming more desperate, and the poem beginner progress. It will begin with differences to nature become the more expensive. So in the first, well, if hand fountains, river, wind, the ocean, so that is quite soft of it's based majority, but in first 2, where I'm suggesting she should reject his demands, it so tries again, and he encouraged this with the more critical classical of salt rider and the earth now is submerged, and it feels to me like the widening. Within a scope, submerged reflects the suppression of the speaker who progress in the gender image to try and persuade his lover. Secondly, the verb usually progress to more and more, despite also in the first and what's sexually being mentioned about what you know, what happens in nature when mixed and mingled. Okay, it's quite so gentle. What the meanings of the blending together, but it's first to gain again words I'm suggestion. Perhaps the rage to him and the tries again. This becomes more desperate, and we see clubs and kids now. Clubs particularly has a connection for giving tightly to the language is between verses centrally that reflects the speaker. Growing frustration and the sense of urgency, which is growing this rejection by the women, the rhyme scheme is vacationing. In this program is combination of masculine rhyme and feminine right now. Remember masculine rhyme of where just the one syllable of the final line and the while final words of the line rhyme. So in river and refer, it is a day syllable which rhymes. You can see a color curved hair is very topical, pink and the blue. I apologize for the stop, but I just that the last syllable now with feminine rhyme, the last two syllable rhyme. So I see the motion. It's not just a 10 syllable; it's one syllable as well. I'm ready cleverly, and happening here is the probably cleverest thing of the answer. Promises that Shelley use of rhyme of some mix of masculine and feminine, and what's happening was in the masculine to feminine rhyme literally mingles together. Just wins on himself to masculine and the his lover and the feminines to mingle together. So the rhyme scheme reflects the mingle together of masculine and feminine, which is what the whole line of argument is about. That's a very clever and what that is a very much deliberate choice. But the part we can compare that, for example, when we two part them mostly entirely masculine the rhyme, the very clever note the function. Punctuation is also interesting when we think about the first with this some semicolon. Now in semicolon we have the couple of the semicolon are used to link sentence which are about the some topic. To use semicolon is saying look at the whole argument. Then so link to just a nature mingling together. It's a sort of seeing time to gain is in nature. Also you and I me club together. That's a really clear for like the tap. Now the way it stopped, you can see where does this kind of long sense stop with the question mark, with this question mark, and which indicates that she perhaps isn't playing, but she is not going to. He wants to end her citation. Her sound is a rhetorical question. It's well first and one also back up to the idea Bertolens, the presence of which the film must be sought after by the speaker. Very clever little about the natural imagery is I love imagery to do with nature and of things. We can look at the example for personification where human attributes are given to something as a human, so we can see it for fountains which mingle the winds which have the sweet emotion in the mountains and moonbeams that kiss all of this. There are things that of human attributes that mountain cannot kiss, wind cannot have emotion, and the fountains cannot mingle. So we can see this personification to basically use to back up to line of argument because that speaker wants to draw parallels between what's happening on nature with their is happy in the relationship between the men and women by using personification. He pokes that's parallels, but I think because it first for personification he folds the parallel, but I think because in a speaker part on the reliefs as with the title, very interesting title. Really love philosophy. What is philosophy? Really is a theory which is supposed to guiding principles of human behavior. In other words, the speaker wants to use to believe and wants its listener to believe that because there is a unity of the women and men should be united, but the logic doesn't really add up, and where the love more with the sense that the speaker what the speaker wants us to believe and wants his listener to believe, that because there is unity with nature woman and the man should be united, but the logic doesn't really end up, and we're left more with the sense that the speaker is so obsessed with his lover, and that everything he sees around him, in everything he thinks about, seems to him to back up his argument. So that's all the poem by me, my explanation about love philosophy by Percy Bysshe. I'm very apologies for my mistake. So thank you for your attention. See you.